Where are you? Oh, hello everyone, careful. I think I've made a mistake. I thought it'd be fun to do something spooky for Halloween, and I finally played through Luigi's Mansion 3, but one of the ghosts has gotten out and it's haunting me, and it's around here somewhere, but I'm not really sure where it is, so just watch out. Oh. So, Luigi's Mansion 3 is actually my first Luigi's Mansion game that I've ever played, and I will say straight away that I think Luigi's Mansion 3 is a ton of fun, but it can be hard to get through those opening hours, and we'll get to that soon. This game was on my radar for quite a long time. I didn't quite pull the trigger until now, but 4 years later, how does Luigi's Mansion 3 hold up? So, this game starts with Luigi, Mario, Princess Peach, and a couple of Toads all heading towards the last resort, which is a grand hotel, and they've been invited by the mysterious owner Helen Gravely. Now, the invitation was for a vacation party, but the gang very quickly find out that in fact it was a trap all along. Helen Gravely is working with King Boo, and it doesn't take long before the trap is sprung, and Mario, Princess Peach, and the Toads all end up stuck in paintings. Luigi does narrowly make his escape, and from there he's forced to explore the hotel and look for a way to save his friends. Now, if you're anything like me and you've not played any of the previous Luigi's Mansion games, well, the gameplay loop is sort of unique. At least it's very different from anything that I've ever played before. There's plenty of puzzles and explorable areas, just like other games, especially Nintendo games, but the combat of this game is very, very unique, and it involves fighting all sorts of ghosts with a variety of tools. The main one that you have is your poltergust goo, which is a vacuum that can suck up the ghosts and trap them. The other tools that you get all facilitate being able to eventually suck up these ghosts and trap them, and the further along you get, the cleverer you have to be with the combat. It starts to become a puzzle almost by itself. Now, I think this gameplay is probably the main reason why I never tried a Luigi's Mansion game before, especially when 1 and 2 came out. I was, much more into things like MOBAs and shooters, and I didn't really think this type of gameplay would appeal to me. But over the last few years, I've always thought that Luigi's Mansion 3 looked very cool, even from the initial trailers, and I've always wanted to try it, and so I thought this year I would finally make it the year that I picked up this game and played it. So, given that I originally had reservations, I suppose, about the combat and the gameplay, how did I find it? Well, if I'm honest, I did find it a little bit frustrating at first. Given just how unique the gameplay is, I don't think it's something that you can sort of be used to from playing other games. For example, if you play a lot of shooters, then when you get into a new one, it doesn't take you very long to adjust, and a lot of your muscle memory is still there. Well, this isn't really the case at all for Luigi's Mansion. You use the left stick to move and the right stick to rotate Luigi as you try to, catch and trap these ghosts. So that's kind of similar to a twin stick shooter, but unlike a twin stick shooter, you're not on the top-down view, it's 3D with the camera pulled back. And so sometimes it can be not quite so obvious exactly where the ghost is in relation to you, what angle they're at, whether they're in front or behind Luigi, and also sometimes if you have worked out exactly where the ghost is, it's not always obvious which is the best way to turn Luigi to get to the ghost. And it honestly took me a little while to get used to. I'd be turning the wrong way, or I would think that I was pointing the poltergust in the right direction for the ghost, but it turned out the ghost was at a different angle, or maybe it was, closer to me than I thought. And so really, the first few floors of this game can be a little tricky and a little bit frustrating due to that style of gameplay. So this was part of the reason why I said I almost didn't end up continuing with this game, and the second part of that, and possibly the biggest reason, was due to the level design of the first few levels. Now, I remember back to the marketing of this game, you would see all sorts of different floor designs with amazing different themes, and the levels looked really cool and really diverse, and that was one of the big reasons why, even though I wasn't sure if I would like the gameplay, I was still kind of interested in Luigi's Mansion 3. That diversity, it looked like there was a lot of creativity to offer there. However, the first few floors of the game, basically the first few levels or the first few hours, they really don't showcase that. At least I don't think so. all of the floors are very much sort of normal hotel floors. And while, you know, you do get the poltergust, and it's kind of a tutorial, you get the poltergust, you rescue EGAD pretty much straight away, and you have to figure out together how it is that you're gonna, you know, progress and try and save Mario and Peach and the Toads. But I just found it to be a little bit slow with all the first few floors looking like, you know, just an ordinary hotel, although sure, a very fancy hotel, but it was just an ordinary hotel. So if you combine this with the fact that I was actually struggling to get into the gameplay, I did spend the first few hours of this game worrying that I wouldn't really like it and that I wasn't going to want to continue to play it all the way through. Although I will say every now and then there were these moments that sort of got me encouraged and are sort of the main reason why I kept going. Little details, you know, like whenever something spooky happened, Luigi would jump, which I always found very funny, or, you know, Polterpup was always adorable whenever he showed up. And the piano player boss as well was one of the very first hints of what was to come later in the game, and that was a very different boss to what I'm used to these days, and is more kind of the type of boss fight that I used to remember from the games that I would play when I was much younger. Now, I've not exactly been very positive so far, but I will say that everything started to change on floors 6 and 7. First, you notice that the elevator arrow has turned into a sword, and you step out of the elevator and it looks like you're about to go and adventure into this giant castle, which it turns out, in fact, you are. You have to get through the first puzzle is to get through these gates, and once you're there, you make your way through into an arena. This floor basically straight away was already more fun than the other ones, and then floor 7, the next one up, continues in the same way. Everything's overgrown and you very quickly come across a very spooky watering can. So from here, pretty much every complaint that I had about the start of the game, it just vanishes like straight away from floors 6 and 7. This is the point where that creativity that we come to expect in Nintendo games really shines through. Every single floor feels totally unique and different, and the puzzles really start to become very plentiful, and there's so much variety in there. Just in those first 2 floors alone, the puzzles change up to the point where you're using Luigi to avoid spike traps, or maybe you're picking up a buzzsaw in order to cut through a vine to progress. It just becomes very different from that point, and that's where I started to have a lot more fun. And I will say that each of these floors is realized just so beautifully. The graphics look really good for a Nintendo Switch game. Sure, on a handheld it looks great, but even on a TV, you know, I've got a 4K TV, quite a big TV as well, so that image gets stretched out a fair bit. But even on that TV, it still looks pretty good. There's only a little bit of pixelation around the edges when you're like really zoomed in on some of the characters and some of the cutscenes. Other than that, it looks really good even on the telly. And I think it holds up really well for, you know, it's particularly a Switch game that's 4 years old now. And not only do these floors graphically look very good, but each one seems like it is just chock full of unique ideas. Some of the highlights for me include the Spectral Catch floor, the Paranormal Productions floor, and the Unnatural History Museum floor. I liked all of the floors really, but those were some of my favorites. So by the point that you're getting to some of these much more interesting floors, you're also getting a lot more used to the combat as well, I think. And each of the ghosts that you fight are really just a delight to see. I've not played the previous games, so I don't know how it differs, but in Luigi's Mansion 3 at least, Next Level Games have found a lot of ways to shake the combat up and keep it interesting. It's not always just a case of flash your torch at the ghost and then suck them up with the poltergust. Just some of the very basic changes that they make sometimes. So some of the ghosts have sunglasses on, so you actually can't flash them with the torch straight away. You have to find a way to get the sunglasses off them, or sometimes they have weapons. There are things like ghosts that when you defeat them you get a ton of gold, or there are these ghosts that, well, they'll sometimes fade away and become invisible, and you have to find a way to spot them before they sneak up on you and grab them. And once you're used to the combat, fighting these becomes a lot more fun. A special mention though has to go to the boss fights. I think in a lot of games, boss fights can either make or break a game. I think sometimes they can either be the highlight or they can be the thing that makes you go, oh, I like this game, but the boss fights are kind of rubbish. I think the very first of the Deus Ex modern games, I really liked that game, but the boss fights were kind of a bit rubbish in there and they didn't take into account your choices, versus something like Final Fantasy 16, where the boss fights in that game are just a complete highlight. And in Luigi's Mansion, I think the boss fights are really good here as well. They're some of the most creative boss fights that I think I've played in any game for a really long time, and each one is, I know I keep saying different, but each one is very different. Each one is just so fun to play. I mentioned already in the video the piano player boss. That was the first one that sort of gave you a hint of what was to come, but all of them really are defeated in unusual ways and have something really unique about them that shines through. Just to talk about some of my favorites quickly, I really like the T-Rex boss in the Unnatural History Museum. You come out of the elevator, you go into this big room, and there's a giant T-Rex skeleton standing at the end of the room. And then every now and then the lights will sort of flicker off, and when they come back on, you sort of think to yourself, I don't think that T-Rex was in that position before when the lights went off. And then eventually you get right up close to it and the fight begins. Another one that I really like were the 3 magician ghosts from the Twisted Sweets. They play lots of silly little tricks on Luigi. And then when you get to the final boss fight, it was actually really quite hard. I very nearly died on this one. I did find it genuinely challenging, which not all of this game is. A lot of this game is quite easy, and then every now and then you do get these challenging boss fights, and that does make things a lot of fun. So at this point, I do kind of feel like I'm just gushing over this game, but just to give you another example of the creativity that goes into the level design, and that is in the B2 basement floor level. This level is just flooded with water, and partway through, in order to navigate it, Luigi has to jump into one of these big floating rubber ducks. And instead of controlling this normally, you have to use the poltergust to sort of blow you away from where it is that you don't want to be and towards where it is that you want to go. And I wasn't expecting that at all, and I thought it was really clever. And in fact, the boss fight for this floor involves a float battle, essentially, where you're trying to knock each other onto the spikes around the arena. So just a few other things that I would like to mention about this game, and that is that the game is genuinely funny. There are a lot of moments that made me laugh. Luigi is very silly, he's very scared all the time. A lot of the ghosts do funny, silly things that make you chuckle. I remember one of the more sort of normal bosses from the earlier levels was a ghost that was a maid, and when you first tried to trap her, she would tickle Luigi with her feather duster and make him sneeze in order to release her from the vacuum, and that was sort of one of the first moments that made me laugh and think that the game was going to be funny the whole way through, which it was. Secondly, the collectibles. Now, I think I've said this before, but I'm not hugely into collectibles. I never go back and, collect everything that there is in a game, but I do know that a lot of people do appreciate collectibles a lot. But in this game, even I could sort of see the fun and the charm in collecting these. They seem to pop up from nowhere sometimes, and you would be rewarded for, just investigating things that you thought looked odd. One of your attachments, the dark light, reveals things that are normally invisible. So yeah, like I said, you really do get rewarded for exploring, and if you think something looks weird, then there's often a reason for that. Maybe you have to use the vacuum on it, maybe it's the dark light that needs to reveal something, and often you do get one of these gems. There's often some great puzzles behind getting to them, and I think that anybody who enjoys collectibles will really appreciate what there is in this game. Now, once I got to the more exciting floors, most of my negatives for this game really just fell away, but there were one or two that sort of stuck around, and I'm going to talk about those very quickly now. Probably the bigger one, although I would still say that it's quite minor, was I didn't like the polterkitty moments in this game at all. Whenever I finished a floor, I was always really excited to see what the next floor was, because that was the main enjoyment from the game for me, was seeing what it was that was coming next, seeing what interesting idea it was that Next Level Games had put into the floor above you. And so the polterkitty, stealing the elevator button and then taking you through the same floor and going back to previous floors and things like that, it just felt like it slowed the pace of the game down a little bit for me. On top of that, the mechanic to catch polterkitty, it didn't always seem to work. Like, I understood that you were supposed to wait for polterkitty to sneak up behind you and hide her eyes, and then you would turn around and use the flashlight when she opened them, but often, even if she did have her eyes closed, she'd still just run away from me. So that got very frustrating, and eventually I just sort of had to look up some tips from some people where they put Gooigi in front of Luigi instead and did it that way. So that was a bit of a shame, but luckily, at least once you did finish the polterkitty moments, you were back on to doing something really interesting and seeing what the next floor was pretty quickly. I did also think we'd get some new mechanics as the game went on, some new attachments for the poltergust maybe, or some new types of light or something like that facilitated new puzzles or different ways to catch different ghosts, some new enemy types perhaps. And that didn't really happen. There was one new thing where you could plug the poltergust into the wall, and so it became much more powerful, and you could, suck up things that you normally couldn't. But I really only remember using that once or twice as part of the main, missions. Maybe you use them more if you're hunting down for those collectibles, but I didn't really use them very much. So that also seemed like just maybe a little bit of a missed opportunity. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more variety in your toolset as you went through the game. On the whole though, I do really like Luigi's Mansion 3. I think it suffers just a little bit from a slow start, which might put a few people off, like it nearly did me. But if you stick with it, I think you'll find a gem of a game that's really unique, especially in the mix of games that are out there today. There's nothing really quite like this. Not to mention the variety. I said this in my last video about Mario Wonder, but I really think that games that have a lot of variety and keep changing things up are, you know, one of the ways to keep people really interested and really engaged in your game. And especially for me, that keeps me playing as opposed to getting bored and looking for something else to play. And now because of Luigi's Mansion 3, I'm considering going back and playing 1 and 2. Although I don't really know if they have the same sort of uniqueness in each of the floors as number 3 does. So if you have played Luigi's Mansion 1 and 2, you know, let me know how they are compared to each other. But what about you? What do you think of Luigi's Mansion 3? Have you played it and you really love it, or have you sort of been thinking about playing it and maybe now is the time to finally dive in and play this game during this spooky season? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I hope to see you in the next one.